The bay quarter-horse mare named Mercy stood at the south paddock fence of the Bell Crow Ranch at 6:21 on a Friday morning in mid-October, her warm muzzle pressed against the top rail, her dark, patient eyes fixed on the gravel walking path that led from the patriarch's house. The path was empty. Mercy had stood at this fence at this time on 5,004 mornings of her 11-year life. The man who had walked down the path to her on 5,003 of those mornings, with a small folded brown paper bag of 2 sugar cubes in his right hand and the small black walnut walking stick that had been his own father's in his left, had been an 82-year-old African-American widower in a soft cream cardigan named Mr. Beauregard Lockhart. On the 5,004th morning, however, Mr. Beauregard Lockhart was, in fact, not coming down the gravel path. He was, on this particular Friday morning, sitting on the edge of his bed in the upstairs west bedroom of the patriarch's house, holding in his right hand a small folded yellowed manila envelope he had not opened in 26 years and 3 months. Mercy waited. At 6:26, the small, soft, uneven crunch of gravel on gravel began at the far end of the access lane that led from the bunkhouse. Mercy lifted her head 1/4 inch. The crunch was uneven because the man making it walked with a slight permanent limp in his right leg, the kind of careful, uneven step a man develops when, 26 years ago that month, on a humid August evening on a stretch of 2-lane highway 8 miles east of Sanderson, Texas, his late model Chevrolet pickup truck had rolled 3 times in a soft cattle ditch off the shoulder, and the cattle ditch had taken from his right femur the 1 inch of bone that separates a man who walks evenly from a man who walks the way the limping gardener of the Bell Crow Ranch had been walking every morning for the past 6 months. The limping gardener walked the gravel access lane up to the south paddock fence at 6:28. He had a small folded brown paper bag of 2 sugar cubes in his right hand. He had not, before this morning, ever brought Mercy her sugar. He had asked Miss Honora Cantwell at the patriarch's kitchen door at 5:45 whether the patriarch might be ill, and Miss Honora had said very softly, "Son, he is not ill. He is this morning only sitting upstairs. He has, son, sat upstairs for an hour like this twice in the last 26 years. He will, son, come down. The mare needs her sugar. Take it. Walk slow. Mercy is patient. She will know you." The limping gardener had said, "Yes, ma'am." Mercy had, in fact, on his arrival at the fence, lowered her warm, soft muzzle to the small brown paper bag. She had taken, with the careful, soft, prehensile touch that horses use with strangers, the first sugar cube from his open palm. She had chewed it slowly. She had taken the second cube. She had chewed it slowly. She had then lifted her dark, patient eyes and had looked for a long-held moment into the eyes of the limping gardener. Her ears, which had, for 5,003 mornings, twitched once toward the soft, creased voice of Mr. Beauregard Lockhart, twitched this morning once toward the soft, creased voice of a man Mercy had not, in 11 years, met before. Mercy had, in the careful, private place where horses keep the small registries of the men who feed them, written down the man's voice. The voice she had written down was a voice she had heard before, on a different fence, in a different ranch year, 26 years and 3 months ago, on the lips of a tall, lean 19-year-old African-American boy in dusty work boots, giving her own mother, then a 6-year-old bay quarter-horse mare named Mercy's Charity, 2 sugar cubes in the same way before saddling her up for the long, careful September gather of the South pasture. Mercy did not, in any way that a quarter-horse mare can express such a thing on a Friday morning in October, mistake the voice. Mercy lowered her warm muzzle once, gently, to the limping gardener's right hand and held it there for a slow breath. The limping gardener said, very softly, in the careful, low voice he had used in Saltillo, in Coahuila, with his mother's elderly aunt's old gray mare in the year his memory had begun to come back, "Mama, I know. He had, for one held moment, laid his hand on Mercy's warm cheek. The Bell Crow Ranch sat on 14,400 acres of rolling Texas Hill country limestone, mesquite, cedar, oak, and blue stem grass, 23 miles southwest of Fredericksburg in Gillespie County, on the long, quiet stretch of Texas Highway 165 that wound its slow, patient way through the small German-American villages of Dawson, Cherry Spring, and toward the Mason County line. The ranch had been founded in 1881 by a freedman named Hezekiah Lockhart, born into bondage in 1849 in Bastrop County, and freed at the age of 16 in 1865. Hezekiah, on the strength of $2,500 he had earned in 7 years of contract cattle driving on the Chisholm Trail with an outfit out of Goliad, had purchased on the 7th of April of that year the original 440 acres of the ranch from a German-American widow named Mrs. Helga Pfaff, whose husband had passed of yellow fever the previous summer. Hezekiah had built the ranch up year by year until at his passing in 1909 he had owned 3,400 acres, 800 head of cattle, 12 quarter horses, and a small, careful family. The ranch had been passed down, son to son, daughter to daughter, for 5 generations. Mr. Beauregard Lockhart, the current patriarch, was the great-great-grandson of the founder. He had, since 1978, been the owner. He had increased the acreage from 8,000 to 14,400. He had, in 1996, raised one only son. His name had been Sebastian Lockhart. He had been born on the 11th of November of 1978, the same week his father had taken over the ranch from his grandfather. He had been 19 years old in the August of 1998 when, on the 7th of August, on a humid Friday afternoon at the South Stable, after a long, careful 3-month courtship, he had not, until that afternoon, mentioned to his father. Sebastian had told Mr. Beauregard Lockhart that he had asked 2 evenings earlier for the hand of a soft-eyed 19-year-old young woman from the small migrant cattle hand camp at the North Fence named Miss Esperanza Salazar, the only daughter of a cattle hand from Coahuila named Mr. Cipriano Salazar, who had been working the Bell Crow Ranch's spring and fall gathers since 1993. Sebastian had told his father very carefully that Esperanza had said yes. Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had, on a humid Friday afternoon in August of 1998, made the largest mistake of his 82 years of life. He had, with the small, stiff-necked patriarchal pride of a 60-year-old fifth-generation ranch owner who had, on that particular Friday, not yet learned the order of the verbs, told his only son that he could not, with the family's blessing, marry the daughter of a migrant cattle hand. Sebastian had, at his father's word, set down his hat, walked into the south stable, saddled Mercy's Charity, then a 6-year-old bay quarter-horse mare, ridden the long 4-mile loop down to the migrant cattle hand camp at the North Fence, asked Mr. Cipriano Salazar's permission for the elopement, ridden back, packed a single canvas duffel bag of his clothes, took the small black walnut walking stick his great-grandfather had carved in 1904, took the late model Chevrolet pickup truck his father had given him at 18, helped Esperanza into the passenger seat, and had pulled out the south gate of the Bell Crow Ranch at 4:07 in the afternoon of the 7th of August of 1998. Sebastian and Esperanza had been married 3 days later on the morning of the 10th of August by a kind old Catholic priest named Father Bartolomeo Veracruz at a small parish chapel on the outskirts of Sanderson, Texas, 51 miles east of the Mexican border. They had, after the wedding, stayed 2 nights at a small motel called the Eagle Pass Star Motor Lodge. They had, on the afternoon of the 12th of August, after a long, quiet morning of Sebastian's careful, patient, growing willingness to drive home and try very slowly to mend things with his father, climbed back into the late-model Chevrolet pickup truck and had begun the long drive west toward Fredericksburg. The truck had rolled at exactly 6:43 on the evening of the 12th of August on a stretch of 2-lane Texas Highway 90, 8 miles east of Sanderson, in a sudden rain squall that had reduced visibility to perhaps 15 feet for the length of perhaps 90 seconds. A coyote had run across the road. Sebastian had swerved. The truck had hit a soft cattle ditch on the south shoulder, rolled 3 times, and had come to rest on its passenger side in the ditch. Esperanza Lockhart, formerly Esperanza Salazar, 2 months pregnant, had not survived the rollover. She had died on the scene before the Texas state trooper, a kind, soft-eyed white man of 41 named Sergeant Jubilee Whitson, had reached the truck at 6:58. She was buried 3 days later in the small Catholic cemetery on the outskirts of Sanderson by Father Bartolomeo Veracruz, with her father, Mr. Cipriano Salazar, driving up from the Bell Crow Ranch, and her aunt, Doña Inocencia Caldera Salazar, driving up from Saltillo, Coahuila, on a borrowed bus. Sebastian Lockhart had, on the rollover, suffered a shattered right femur, a deep, severe concussion, and a 6-inch laceration along the back of his right shoulder that the small county hospital outside Sanderson had, with the careful, unhurried patience of a small county hospital in 1998, sewn back together with 18 patient, careful stitches. He had been unconscious for 19 days. He had, on regaining consciousness, had no memory of his name, his address, his father, or the events of the previous 4 months. Doña Inocencia Caldera Salazar, by then 68 years old, a widow and a former Saltillo public school nurse, had, on the day Sebastian had been declared medically stable enough to travel, signed the small, careful Mexican-Texas border permit at the Eagle Pass crossing, and had taken the small, bewildered 19-year-old young man, who could not at that time remember whether his name was Sebastian or whether his name might, in fact, be the assumed name of Atticus Wright, she had quietly written into the small parish cemetery records to keep him out of the shame of his late father-in-law and the shame of his own unremembered father, home on the bus to her own small house on the Calle de las Margaritas in Saltillo, Coahuila, where she had nursed him back to physical health over the 17 months that followed. Sebastian's memory had, in the manner of memories that come back after a deep, severe concussion, returned, slowly in pieces, between his 20th and his 22nd birthdays. He had remembered, by 21, his name. He had remembered by 21 and a half his father's house. He had remembered on the morning of his 22nd birthday the rollover. He had not, however, by his 22nd birthday, found a way back to the ranch. The grief at Esperanza's loss had been, in the small, careful early 20s heart of a young man who had buried his pregnant wife at 19, too large. The shame of his father's last words to him at the South Stable had been, on his more difficult mornings, also too large. He had, at 22, decided with the small, careful firmness of a young man who had decided too many things at 22, that he would not return to the Bell Crow Ranch until he had become the kind of man who would, on returning, be worth taking back. He had taken work as a landscape laborer and a quiet, careful gardener at a small parish and orphanage estate outside Saltillo. He had worked there for 23 years. He had cared with the small, steady, careful patience of a man who had learned how to live with what he had for Doña Inocencia for the last 8 years of her life. She had passed peacefully in his small, careful arms in the spring of his 44th year. 6 months after her funeral, he had taken the small black walnut walking stick that was the only thing that had survived the rollover from the bunkhouse of his small Saltillo house, had crossed the Eagle Pass border crossing on the morning of his 45th birthday, had ridden a Greyhound bus to Fredericksburg, and had, on the afternoon of the 7th of April, walked into the small Bell Crow Ranch hiring office at the new Visitor Center construction site, had signed an application for a landscape gardener position under the small assumed name Doña Inocencia had, 26 years earlier, penciled into the parish cemetery records, and had begun work as a quiet, limping landscape gardener at the Bell Crow Ranch on the morning of the 14th of April. He had not, in the 6 months since, told anyone at the Bell Crow Ranch his real name. He had not, in the 6 months since, walked closer than 200 yards to the patriarch's house. He had not, in the 6 months since, decided whether he was, in fact, a man worth taking back. The young woman who had been, for the last 4 months, the limping gardener's direct supervisor, and who had also been, for the last 4 months, the small, careful, unstated source of his determination to keep showing up at the Bell Crow Ranch every morning at 5:45 with his pruning shears and his folded canvas work apron, was a 28-year-old African-American horticulturist named Miss Celine Brackett. Celine Brackett had grown up until the age of 16 in the small, clean third-floor apartment her late mother had rented above a hardware store on Manor Road in East Austin, Texas. She had, at 16, moved to her grandmother's small house on Pine Street in Bastrop, Texas, after her late mother had passed, very suddenly, of an undiagnosed heart condition on a Wednesday afternoon in late September. She had, at 18, on a small, full-tuition Bastrop Garden Club scholarship, enrolled at the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences at the University of Texas at Austin in a 5-year combined bachelor's and master's program in landscape horticulture. She had, at 23, completed the program with a small thesis on the small, careful question of how the native blue-stem grass of the Texas Hill Country might be reintroduced into commercial-scale ranchland landscapes after 140 years of overgrazing. She had taken, on completing the thesis, a 4-year position as a junior staff horticulturist at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center in Southwest Austin. She had, in early June of this year, after 4 good years at the Wildflower Center, accepted a 5-year position as the head landscape gardener at the new $10 million Bell Crow Ranch Visitor Center and Event Venue project, a small, careful, tasteful new structure of native cedar, limestone, and Texas-leaded glass that the ranch had begun building in the spring of last year on a small, careful corner of its south pasture, and that was scheduled to open to the public in the spring of next year. Celine had been, on her first morning at the Bell Crow Ranch on the 7th of June, a 28-year-old African-American woman, 5 feet and 4 inches tall, slender in the manner of a young horticulturist who walks 7 miles a day on her own job sites, with warm, light brown skin, large, dark, almond-shaped eyes, and her thick, natural black hair pulled into a neat, double French braid down the back of her neck. The way her late mother's mother had taught her in Bastrop was the way a Brackett young woman wore her hair on a job site. She had, on the morning of the 7th of June, met the limping gardener at the new visitor center fountain at 6:06 in the morning. She had walked across the gravel access lane in her dusty tan canvas work pants and her soft, cream cotton long-sleeved button-down work shirt and her tan leather work boots, and had, with her small, careful young horticulturist's professional courtesy, said, "Good morning, Celine Brackett. I believe I am your new boss. Mr. Wright, is it?" The limping gardener had, at her introduction, set down his pruning shears, removed his old wide-brimmed straw work hat, and had said, in the careful, low voice he had used in Saltillo, "Atticus Wright. Yes, ma'am, I am told it is so." Celine had laughed once very softly at his small, careful, old-fashioned response. She had said, "Mr. Wright, you and I are going to get along. Show me the south fountain. Then show me the blue stem grass test patch on the north berm. I want to see, Mr. Wright, what you have been doing with the blue stem these past 2 months." He had shown her the south fountain. He had shown her the blue stem on the north berm. They had walked the access lane together for an hour and 40 minutes. By the end of the hour and 40 minutes, Celine had decided, with the small, careful, unstated certainty of a young horticulturist who had spent 4 years at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center reading other people's botanical fieldwork, that the limping gardener of the Bell Crow Ranch had, in his calm, careful, patient hands and his calm, careful, patient eye, more practical landscape horticulture knowledge than 3 of the senior horticulturists she had worked under at the Wildflower Center combined. She had not, on the 7th of June, told him. She had, however, in the 4 months that followed, found herself more often than she had intended walking to the new visitor center fountain at 6:06 in the morning, 2 minutes before her scheduled 6:08 start time, in order to have, with the limping gardener, the small, careful 70-second exchange of greetings that had, by the third week of June, become the small, private, steady center of her week. There had been, between June and October, certain small, careful Tuesday afternoon and Friday afternoon events at the new visitor center site that Celine had, in the small, careful, private accounting she kept in the small blue notebook on her bedside table, marked as the small, careful pieces of evidence on which her quiet, private question about Mr. Atticus Wright had grown. On the third Tuesday of June, a hard, sudden Texas Hill country thunderstorm had blown across the south pasture at 4:11 in the afternoon, and Mr. Wright had, very quietly, walked the 80-yard length of the half-finished cedar pergola Selene had been overseeing the framing of, lifted in his arms the small terracotta pot of his own mother-in-law tongue plant that Celine had, 2 weeks earlier, brought to the new break room as a small, careful gift to the construction crew, and had carried the small terracotta pot to the small, dry corner of the storage shed before the rain had wet it. He had said, on returning, only, "Ma'am, I am sorry. I had not intended to take a thing from your break room without asking. I judged, ma'am, that a wet pot would do the small plant no favors." Celine had said, "Mr. Wright, the plant thanks you." He had laughed very quietly. For the first time she had heard him laugh. On the second Friday of July, she had found, on her small wooden field supply box at the visitor center fountain at 6:15 in the morning, a small folded brown paper bag containing 2 perfectly ripe Texas Hill country peaches and a small handwritten note in careful old-fashioned cursive that had read, "Miss Brackett, the peaches are from the small Pedernales Valley orchard, south of Stonewall. They are good Texas peaches. Eat them today. Do not, ma'am, leave them in the supply box past the noon heat. Mr. A. Wright." She had eaten the peaches at 10 in the morning under the small live oak halfway between the visitor center site and the bunkhouse. She had, on the second Saturday of July, baked Mr. Wright a small, careful peach cobbler in her own small, careful employee duplex kitchen and had carried it to the bunkhouse at 4 in the afternoon. She had set it, with a small folded note, on the small wooden table outside his door. Her note had said, "Mr. Wright, the cobbler is from the Pedernales Valley peaches. Eat it today. Do not, sir, leave it past the noon heat tomorrow. Miss S. Brackett." She had walked away. She had not, until the following Monday at 6:06 at the fountain, learned that Mr. Wright had eaten the cobbler over the course of 3 small, careful evenings on the bunkhouse porch with a small fork, and had, on the second Sunday evening, sat on the bunkhouse porch swing thinking, for the first time in 26 years, that the Lord might, in fact, be on his way back to him. In the third week of August, Mr. Wright had quietly extended the workday at the visitor center fountain from 6:06 in the morning to 5:30 so that he could, in the small, careful, private extra 40 minutes between 5:30 and 6:06, finish the small, careful work of replanting the south berm with 3 rows of native blue stem grass at exactly the spacing Celine's master's thesis, Chapter 4, had recommended. He had not told her he had read her thesis. She had, on the morning of the 4th Wednesday of August at 6:06, walked up to the south berm to start her own day, found the 3 rows of native blue stem already replanted at exactly her thesis-recommended spacing, recognized the small, careful spacing as the spacing she had spent 2 years arguing for in Chapter 4, and had, on the south berm in the small, soft Texas dawn, said softly only, "Mr. Wright, where, sir, did you find a copy of my thesis?" By the second week of August, she had begun to suspect that she was, in some small, careful way she had not before then expected, falling, very slowly, in love with the limping gardener of the Bell Crow Ranch. By the second week of September, she had quietly stopped suspecting and had quietly accepted that she had, in fact, fallen. She had not told him. She had not told her grandmother. She had not, in any way except in her own careful private notebook, told the Lord either. The notebook in question was a small, worn blue 5-and-dime spiral notebook with a metal spiral along its spine. Her grandmother on Pine Street in Bastrop, Mrs. Tessalee Brackett, 81 years old that October, had given Celine the first of those notebooks on the morning of Celine's 10th birthday, with a small, careful instruction Mrs. Tessalee had said on the porch of the Pine Street house was the only sentence a Brackett woman needed to know about a notebook. Mrs. Tessalee had said, "Baby, a true sentence a night. The Lord, baby, takes those." Celine had, since the age of 10, written one true sentence in such a notebook every night before sleep. There were on the small pine bookshelf in Celine's small, careful one-bedroom apartment in the small, careful tan and stone employee housing duplex the Bell Crow Ranch provided to its junior salaried staff by the morning of the Limping gardener's first sugar cube delivery to Mercy, 18 blue notebooks. The 18th notebook had, on the night of the 13th of October, the Thursday evening before the Friday morning of Mercy's sugar, contained on its open page the single true sentence Celine had written before bed. Celine had written, "I am, Lord, going to ask Mr. Wright to share Sunday supper with me at the small employee dining hall this Sunday evening. I will, Lord, ask him at 5:15 on Saturday afternoon." The Lord had, during the night, made no objection. Celine had decided she would ask. Miss Honora Cantwell, the Bell Crow Ranch housekeeper at the patriarch's house, was 76 years old that October. She had been, since the age of 25, the housekeeper at the patriarch's house. Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had hired her in the spring of 1973 on the recommendation of his late wife's older sister, who had said only, "Beau, Honora is a Cantwell. The Cantwells, Beau, do not, in my experience, fall short. Hire her." Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had hired her. She had not, in 51 years, fallen short. Miss Honora Cantwell had been at the patriarch's kitchen window that Friday morning at 6:28, when the limping gardener of the Bell Crow Ranch had walked a gravel access lane up to the south paddock fence with the small folded brown paper bag of 2 sugar cubes in his right hand and the small uneven crunch in his step. She had, on the limping gardener stopping at the fence and lowering his hand to Mercy's warm muzzle, set down on the kitchen counter the small ceramic mug of warm chamomile tea she had been carrying upstairs to Mr. Beauregard Lockhart, and had walked to the small kitchen window and had, for the length of perhaps 6 slow, careful breaths, looked across the kitchen yard at the small, uneven figure at the south paddock fence. She had then, with the small, slow, careful unhurriedness of a 76-year-old housekeeper who had been waiting for a small, careful Friday morning of this exact shape since the 2nd of November of 1998, dried her hands on a small white linen kitchen towel, set down the kitchen towel, walked out the kitchen side door, walked across the kitchen yard, walked along the gravel access lane, and had stopped, very quietly, 3 feet behind the limping gardener at the south paddock fence. She had said very softly, "Son, forgive me. May I see your right ear?" The limping gardener had, at her words, gone very still. He had not, for the length of perhaps 2 slow, careful breaths, turned. Then he had, very slowly, turned. He had lowered his old straw work hat from his head. He had inclined his right side toward Miss Honora Cantwell. The small triangular scar on his right earlobe, the small triangular scar a 6-year-old boy on the south porch of the patriarch's house had in 1985, on a careless August afternoon while learning to bait a fishhook on the small irrigation pond, given to himself with the small barbed number 6 eagle claw fishhook at the end of a length of monofilament, had been, on his right earlobe, exactly where it had been on the 7th of August of 1998, when Miss Honora Cantwell had, at the South Stable, looked at it last. Miss Honora Cantwell had said, very quietly, "Sebastian Lockhart, forgive me? Welcome home, son." The limping gardener had said, in the small, careful, low voice of a 45-year-old man who had been waiting 26 years to hear that sentence, Mama Honora, you knew. Miss Honora Cantwell had said, Son, I knew on the morning of the second day. I did not say. I would not, son, have said anything had you, on the morning of the seventh month, walked back through the south gate without saying. I knew, son. I waited. She had laid her broad, warm, dark hand on his right shoulder. She had said, Come up to the porch, son. Your father is having a hard morning. He is, in this hour, alone in the upstairs west bedroom. He has been holding a small, folded, yellowed manila envelope in his right hand for 43 minutes. The envelope has, son, in it the photograph of you and Esperanza on the morning of your wedding. The envelope, son, has been in the third drawer of his upstairs bureau for 26 years and 3 months. He had, son, not opened it until this morning. The Lord, son, opened it for him. The Lord opened it, son, in this exact hour. Come up to the porch. Sebastian had said, Mama Honora, may I in the porch swing on the south porch sit with you for 15 minutes before I go up? I have, Mama, 26 years of saying I have rehearsed in pieces. I have, Mama, never in 26 years rehearsed it for my father in less than an hour. I will, Mama, cut it to 15 minutes of the most important pieces. I will then go up. Miss Honora Cantwell had said, Son, come. They had sat in the small, wide, cream-painted porch swing on the south porch of the patriarch's house for 46 minutes. Sebastian had told her the rollover. He had told her the 18 stitches. He had told her the 19 days of unconsciousness. He had told her Doña Inocencia. He had told her Saltillo. He had told her the parish and orphanage gardens. He had told her the morning his memory of his father's house had come back. He had told her the morning he had buried Doña Inocencia. He had told her the 7th of April. He had told her the 4 months with Selina Brackett at the new visitor center fountain. Miss Honora Cantwell had, in the porch swing, listened without interrupting, with the small, soft, careful patience of a 76-year-old Belle Crow Ranch housekeeper who had been, 51 years ago, hired on the recommendation of the patriarch's late wife's older sister, and who had not, in those 51 years, fallen short. She had, every 12 minutes or so, laid her broad, warm, dark hand gently on Sebastian's right wrist, and had said only, Son, slow down. The Lord, son, has time. Tell me the next piece. She had, on hearing the small, careful piece about Doña Inocencia's last morning, set her right hand briefly to her own forehead and had said very quietly, Son, the good people the Lord lets us bury are the good people the Lord lets us live with. May Doña Inocencia rest, son, easy. She had, on hearing the small, careful piece about Selina Brackett at the South Berm, finding the blue stem grass replanted in the chapter for spacing, laughed once, very quietly, the small, relieved laugh of a 76-year-old woman who had, in the small, careful, private place where housekeepers keep the small registries of the young women whom the Lord might in time intend for the men of the house, written down Miss Selina Brackett's name on the morning of the 7th of June. She had said at the end of the 46 minutes, Son, the 4 months at the South Fountain were not, in fact, an accident. The Lord, son, was, at 6:06 in the morning, putting Miss Brackett at the fountain for a reason. The reason, son, has now come round. Go upstairs to your father, son. Walk slow on the stairs. The right knee, son, will not love the stairs. Hold the rail. Sebastian had said, Mama, I will hold the rail. Miss Honora Cantwell had risen from the porch swing. She had brushed the small, careful folds out of her white cotton apron. She had walked with Sebastian to the front screen door of the patriarch's house, opened it gently for him, and had said, very softly, on the front hall threshold, Son, the Lord will, in this hour, do what the Lord has been waiting 26 years and 3 months to do. Walk slow. He has, son, the time. Miss Honora Cantwell had, on the 4 months with Selene Brackett, smiled for the first time in 46 minutes. She had said, "Son, Selene Brackett is, in my private opinion, exactly the young woman the Lord has been keeping for you these 26 years. You will not, however, son, mention any of this to her this morning. You will, son, mention it to her on the Tuesday after this Tuesday. You will, son, this morning go upstairs to your father." Sebastian had said, "Mama, yes." He had risen. He had walked up the small, painted wooden front porch steps. He had walked through the front screen door of the patriarch's house. He had walked across the long, polished pine floor of the front hall. He had walked up the curving front staircase. He had walked down the long hall to the upstairs west bedroom. He had stopped at the closed door. He had very gently knocked twice. "Mr. Beauregard Lockhart," had said, in the soft, creased voice of an 82-year-old patriarch who had, in his upstairs west bedroom for 43 minutes, been holding a small, folded, yellowed manila envelope. "Honora, come in. I know." Sebastian had said, very quietly, through the closed door, "Daddy, it is not Mama Honora. It is your son. May I, sir, come in?" There had been, on the other side of the door, a long-held silence. The silence had lasted, by Sebastian's count, the length of 19 slow, careful breaths. Then there had been, on the other side of the door, the small, soft, careful sound of an 82-year-old man rising slowly from the edge of his bed. Then the door had opened. Mr. Beauregard Lockhart, 82 years old, in a soft cream cardigan, with a small black walnut walking stick in his right hand, had stood in the doorway with the small folded yellowed manila envelope in his left hand. He had looked, for the length of perhaps 4 held breaths, at the 45-year-old African-American man in a faded chambray work shirt and dusty tan canvas work pants standing in the upstairs hallway of the patriarch's house. He had seen the small triangular scar on the right earlobe. He had seen the small, uneven, careful stance on the right leg. He had seen the small black walnut walking stick in the man's right hand, the great-grandfather's stick from 1904 that had, 26 years ago, ridden out the south gate of the Belle Crow Ranch in the passenger-side footwell of a late-model Chevrolet pickup truck. "Mr. Beauregard Lockhart," had said, in a voice that was, in that hallway, on that Friday morning, no longer the voice of an 82-year-old patriarch, but the voice of a 60-year-old father who had, 26 years and 3 months ago, in a humid August afternoon at the South Stable, made the largest mistake of his life. "Sebastian, son, come in." Sebastian had walked in. They had embraced for 15 minutes. They had not, in those 15 minutes, spoken. The small, folded, yellowed manila envelope had, in those 15 minutes, fallen from Mr. Beauregard Lockhart's left hand to the polished pine floor of the upstairs west bedroom, and had remained there unopened on the polished pine floor, while the 82-year-old father and the 45-year-old son had held each other. When they had finished, Sebastian had bent down, very carefully, and had picked up the envelope. He had laid it on the small walnut bedside table. He had said, "Daddy, we will in some other hour open the envelope. This morning, sir, we will sit on the south porch. Mama Honora is making, sir, her cornbread. We will, sir, eat the cornbread. We will, sir, talk." They had sat on the south porch of the patriarch's house for the next 4 hours. Miss Honora Cantwell had, at 9, brought them a small chipped blue plate of warm cornbread, a small wedge of yellow cheddar, a small jar of fig preserves, a small pitcher of cold sweet tea, and 3 small white china plates. They had eaten the cornbread. They had talked. Sebastian had, in the first hour, told his father about Esperanza. He had told him about the small parish chapel in Sanderson, about Father Bartolomeo, about the 2 nights at the Eagle Pass Star Motor Lodge. He had told him about the truck, about the coyote, about the cattle ditch. He had told him about the small county hospital outside Sanderson, about the 18 stitches, about the 19 days, Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had not, in those first 33 minutes, interrupted. He had only twice set down his cold, sweet tea and lifted, with the careful, slow, unhurried hand of an 82-year-old patriarch who had been listening for 26 years to hear his son's voice on the south porch, his right hand to the soft, white linen handkerchief in his cardigan's chest pocket. Sebastian had, in the second hour, told his father about Doña Inocencia. He had told him about the small parish and orphanage gardens in Saltillo, about the 17 years of the small, careful work of pruning roses and staking tomatoes at the small parish gate, about the 8 years of caring for Doña Inocencia in her small, whitewashed house on the Calle de las Margaritas, about the kind, soft-eyed Saltillo Cardinal Don Eulogio Camarena, who had, every Friday afternoon, stopped by the small parish gate to ask Sebastian whether he had, that week, written to his father. Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had said, very quietly, "Son, the cardinal told you to write to me." Sebastian had said, "Yes, Daddy." Mr. Beauregard had said, "Son, I am sorry I did not write to you first. I had, son, no address. The Lord did not give me an address. The Lord, son, gave you the address. I will, son, in some other hour, talk to you about the address." Sebastian had said, "Yes, Daddy." In the third hour, Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had, with the small, careful unhurriedness of an 82-year-old patriarch who had carried for 26 years 3 sentences of his own, said the 3 sentences he had, for 26 years, rehearsed in pieces. He had said, "Sebastian, on the 7th of August of 1998, at the South Stable, I made the largest mistake of my life. I am sorry, son. I will, son, until the day I die, be sorry." He had said, "Sebastian, the ranch has been waiting for you. The ranch is yours. I have, son. Run it for you. I will, son. On my passing, hand it to you." The hands of the founder Hezekiah Lockhart, son, were, on the 7th of April of 1881, the hands of an African-American freedman who had bought, on the strength of $2,500 and 7 years of cattle driving, his small, careful piece of hill country. The hands of his great-great-great-grandson, son, will, in some other day, hand the ranch on. That, son, is the order of the verbs. He had said, "Sebastian, Esperanza, son, was, in my private opinion, the woman the Lord had chosen for you in the August of 1998. I made the mistake of choosing for the Lord. I will, son, until the day I die. Ask the Lord's forgiveness. I will, son, ask hers also. Walk me, son, to her grave at Sanderson when we have, the 2 of us, found a Saturday." Sebastian had said, "Daddy, we will go on the 2nd Saturday of November. I have, sir, asked Father Bartolomeo Veracruz to meet us at the small parish cemetery at 10 in the morning. He is, sir, 84 years old. He still preaches at St. Joseph's on Sunday at 10. Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had, on Sebastian's having already arranged the visit, set down his cold sweet tea and had said only, "Son, the order of the verbs." Mr. Crawford Lockhart, the patriarch's nephew, had been, since 2012, the ranch manager of the Bell Crow Ranch. He had been, on the morning of the 14th of October, 38 years old. He had been, in the spring of 2012, 26 years old, the only child of Mr. Beauregard Lockhart's late younger brother, Mr. Pemberton Lockhart, and a kind, quiet, retired Houston schoolteacher named Mrs. Genevieve Lockhart. Crawford had, on the morning of the 2nd of January of 2012, been hired by his uncle on the strength of his Texas A&M agribusiness degree and his 3 years at a small hill country veterinary practice as the assistant ranch manager of the Bell Crow Ranch, with the small, careful understanding 12 years earlier between uncle and nephew that the position would, in the fullness of time, after Mr. Beauregard's eventual passing, transitioned to the chief operating role of the ranch and to the eventual sole proprietorship of the entire 14,400 acres. The understanding had been 12 years earlier, made on the assumption that Sebastian Lockhart, declared legally dead by the state of Texas in 1999, was, in fact, dead. Crawford Lockhart had, at 12:43 on the afternoon of the 14th of October, on receiving the small, careful telephone call from Miss Honora Cantwell at the patriarch's house, learned in the soft, creased voice of a 76-year-old housekeeper that the limping gardener of the Bell Crow Ranch was, on the careful evidence of a small triangular scar on the right earlobe and a small black walnut walking stick of 1904, the patriarch's only son, Sebastian Lockhart, alive. Crawford had said, in his small, careful nephew's voice, "Mama Honora, I will be at the patriarch's house at 4:05. Please tell my uncle." He had hung up. He had then sat, for the length of perhaps 11 held minutes, at his small mahogany desk in the ranch office at the North headquarters, looking at the framed 8x10 print of his late father in his 18-month-old hand on the porch of the Bastrop house. He had then said very quietly, to no one in particular, "Daddy, we knew this might come." He had risen. He had driven to the patriarch's house. He had arrived at 4:07. The conversation between Sebastian Lockhart, his father, and his cousin Crawford on the south porch of the patriarch's house from 4:07 to 7:36 on the evening of Friday the 14th of October had been, by the description Miss Honora Cantwell gave Celine Brackett at 5:15 on the Saturday afternoon that followed, the most difficult 3.5-hour conversation Miss Honora Cantwell had ever in her 76 years witnessed at the Bell Crow Ranch. Crawford had not, in those 3.5 hours, doubted that the man on the south porch was, in fact, his cousin Sebastian. Crawford had, however, in the small, careful private place where a 38-year-old nephew who has been the heir apparent for 12 years keeps the small, careful arithmetic of his expected inheritance, asked his uncle very quietly, at 5:31 in the afternoon, on the porch swing, whether the inheritance of the ranch could perhaps be divided. He had said, "Uncle, I have, in 12 years, run this ranch as it stood. I have, sir, run it well. I have, sir, also been the only son in the family for 12 years. I am asking, sir, whether the ranch can, in the fullness of time, be divided." Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had, at his nephew's question, set down his cold, sweet tea, looked at his nephew for the length of perhaps 4 held breaths, and had said very quietly, in the voice he had used at his father's deathbed in 1978, "Crawford, I will not, son, divide the ranch. The ranch will, on my passing, pass to Sebastian. You will, son, be honorably and generously paid out for your 12 years of work. You will, son, be made whole. You will, son, also in the fullness of time, find that I have, in the small, careful private place where a Lockhart keeps a ledger, kept a ledger for you. The ledger, son, is generous. It is not, however, the ranch. The ranch is Sebastian's. I am sorry, son. The order of the verbs, son, is the order of the verbs." Crawford had not for a long-held minute answered. He had, after the long-held minute, said, "Uncle, I hear you." He had risen. He had shaken Sebastian's hand. He had said, "Cousin, welcome home." He had walked off the south porch. He had driven back to the North headquarters. He had not, on the south porch that Friday evening, been a graceful man. He had not, however, been an ungraceful man. He had been, on the small, careful private evidence of a 38-year-old Texas A&M agribusiness graduate who had, 12 years earlier, accepted from his uncle a careful understanding, a man. Celine Brackett had, on the small, careful evidence of a small, careful note, Miss Honora Cantwell had pressed into her palm at the small employee dining hall on the Saturday afternoon, walked at 5:15 on the Saturday afternoon to the south porch of the patriarch's house. The small, careful note had said only, in Miss Honora Cantwell's careful old-fashioned cursive, "Miss Brackett." The patriarch and his son would like pleased to speak with you for 30 minutes at the South Porch this afternoon. Wear your work shirt. Do not, child, dress up. 2. The matter is serious, but it is not formal. Honora Cantwell. Celine had walked. She had worn her work shirt. She had climbed the small painted wooden front porch steps. She had been met at the front door by Miss Honora Cantwell, who had said, very softly, "Baby, come in. The patriarch is on the south porch. Mr. Wright, baby, is also on the south porch. He has been Mr. Wright with you for 4 months. He is, baby, on the small, careful evidence of a Friday morning sugar cube and a small triangular scar on his right earlobe. In fact, the patriarch's only son, Sebastian Lockhart. He is, baby, the heir to the Bell Crow Ranch. He is, baby, also the man you have been thinking of for 4 months. Come in, baby, walk slow, sit on the swing. He will tell you the rest. He has, baby, been telling himself the rest for 4 months. He is, baby, ready." Celine had said in a voice she had not before that moment heard in herself, "Mama Honora, the Lord." Miss Honora Cantwell had said, "Baby, I know." Celine had walked to the south porch. She had sat on the porch swing. She had, for the length of perhaps 3 slow, careful breaths, looked at the limping gardener, at Sebastian, for the first time with the small, careful private knowledge that he was, in fact, the only son of the patriarch. Sebastian had said, very softly, "Celine, I am sorry. I have, for 4 months, been Mr. Atticus Wright with you. I had not, for 4 months, decided whether I would tell anyone. I had, for 4 months, been, in some small, careful, private way, falling in love with you. I had, in that small, careful, private way, been keeping the falling in love a thing I would have to, in the end, decide whether to bring with me into the rest of my life. The Lord Celine has, on the small, careful evidence of a Friday morning sugar cube and a small triangular scar, decided some of that for me. The rest, Celine, is yours. I will not this evening ask anything of you. I will only, this evening, tell you the rest of who I am. We will, after I tell you, sit. We will, after we have sat, decide whether you wish me to walk you back to the employee duplex, or whether you wish me to remain on this porch, or whether you wish, Miss Brackett, to leave the Bell Crow Ranch on Monday morning. I will accept Miss Brackett, whichever of the 3 you choose. I am Miss Brackett, the limping gardener, and I am also Miss Brackett, Sebastian Lockhart. I am hoping, Miss Brackett, that the same young woman has, this afternoon, room in her heart for both." Celine had, for the length of perhaps 8 held breaths, not answered. She had then said very quietly, "Sebastian Lockhart, walk me back to the duplex. Stop at the live oak halfway. Sit on the bench. Tell me the rest. We will, I think the 2 of us, between the live oak and the duplex, find out about the room in the heart." He had walked her. They had stopped at the live oak. They had sat on the small bench. He had told her the rest. By the time they had reached the duplex at the small, careful Texas Hill country dusk, Celine had decided, with the small, careful, unstated certainty she had developed in 4 years at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, reading other people's botanical fieldwork, that the room in her heart for the limping gardener was, in fact, also the room in her heart for Sebastian Lockhart, and that the room in her heart was, in fact, the same room. She had said, on the front step of the duplex in the soft, careful Texas Hill country dusk, "Sebastian, the Lord, evidently, has been for 4 months doing some patient, quiet work between the South Fountain and the North Berm. I am, Sebastian, willing to let him finish. Court me slow. Do not, sir, hurry. I have, sir, been a Brackett woman my whole short life. I will not in any event be hurried." Sebastian had said, "Miss Brackett, I will not hurry." A small, careful, out-of-state private DNA test ordered in the 3rd week of October by Mr. Howard Renly, the patriarch's longtime estate and trust attorney at a small, careful Fredericksburg firm called the Renly and Whitaker Law Office, had returned on the 2nd Tuesday of November The small, careful confirmation that Sebastian Lockhart of the Bell Crow Ranch and the man living in the bunkhouse named Atticus Wright were, with a probability of greater than 99.99%, the same man and the biological son of Mr. Beauregard Lockhart. Mr. Howard Renly, 68 years old, in his soft cream cardigan and his small, steady, old-fashioned voice, had walked the printed test result up to the patriarch's house himself on the small, careful afternoon of the second Tuesday of November, had laid the small printed result on the small walnut side table on the south porch, had said only, Beauregard, Sebastian. The Lord gentleman has confirmed in writing what every quarter-horse mare in the South Paddock has known, on the small, careful evidence of an October Friday morning sugar cube, since the 14th of October. Congratulations, gentlemen. Mr. Renly had, on his way back to the small black Cadillac, accepted from Miss Honora Cantwell a small chipped blue plate of warm cornbread for the road, and had, at the front door, said only, Honora, thank you. The cornbread Honora is, in my private opinion, the steadiest cornbread in Gillespie County. Miss Honora had said, Howard, drive safe. The Texas legal presumption of death judgment of 1999 had been, on the third Tuesday of November, vacated by the Gillespie County District Court, on the small, careful, unopposed petition of Mr. Howard Renly, with the small, careful supporting affidavit of Miss Honora Cantwell. Sebastian Lockhart had been, on the 8th of December, formally restored as the named heir of the Bell Crow Ranch in his father's living trust. Mr. Crawford Lockhart had, on the 1st of February of the year that followed, accepted, with the small, careful, difficult grace he had, at 38 finally found, a generous and binding 12-year buyout of his ranch management contract, a small 250-acre adjoining parcel called the South Crawford pasture that the Lockhart family had bought from a German-American widow's heirs in 1986 and had never built upon, a small two-bedroom hill country stone cottage on the parcel, and the small, careful, permanent right to the family's quarter-horse breeding line royalties from the Crawford lineage. He had, on his cousin Sebastian's insistence, kept the title of Director of Bell Crow Cattle Operations and a small remaining 10% voting share of the cattle business. Sebastian Lockhart and Celine Brackett courted slowly at the careful, small, unhurried Texas Hill country pace Celine had asked for on the front step of the employee duplex for 14 months. They had walked the long, careful evening loop down the gravel access lane to the South Paddock fence every Sunday afternoon. They had eaten on Sundays with Mr. Beauregard Lockhart and Miss Honora Cantwell on the south porch. They had ridden on Saturdays the long, careful loop of the south pasture on Mercy and on a 6-year-old gelding named Texas Soft Wind. In the third month of the courtship, Sebastian had, with great unhurried care, driven Celine the 83 miles south on Texas Highway 16 to the small, careful parish chapel at St. Joseph's in Sanderson, and had introduced her to Father Bartolomeo Veracruz, by then 84 years old, and the small, careful parish cemetery on the outskirts of town, where Esperanza Lockhart had been buried under a small, worn limestone marker since the 14th of August of 1998. Celine had, on the small, careful walk between the chapel and the marker, said only, Sebastian, I am today walking with you to the woman who, 26 years ago, was the woman you walked with first. I will not today ask anything of her. I will, today, only thank her. Will you, sir? Let me. Sebastian had said, very quietly, Yes, Celine. Celine had, at the small, worn limestone marker, knelt for the length of perhaps 3 slow breaths, laid one small hand flat on the marker's warm limestone face, and had said, in the soft, careful voice she used in the small, careful private place where Brackett women had, for 4 generations, talked to women they had never met. Esperanza, forgive me for the long, careful 11 o'clock visit. I am, ma'am, a young woman from East Austin who has, in some small, careful way, come to love the man you loved first. I will, ma'am, take care of him. I will, ma'am, in your honor, name our first daughter Esperanza. I will, ma'am, on my own children's lips. Keep your name a name they will know. The Lord, ma'am, has done quiet work between us this morning. May I, ma'am, in some other autumn come back? She had risen. She had brushed the dust from her knees. Sebastian had, on the small, careful walk back to the truck, taken her right hand in his left for the first time and had not let go. In the 7th month, on a quiet Sunday afternoon at the patriarch's house, Mr. Beauregard Lockhart had, on the south porch, asked Celine whether she would consent to drive with him on the following Saturday morning the 4-hour loop down to Bastrop to meet her own grandmother, Mrs. Tessely Brackett, at the small Pine Street house. Celine had said, "Sir, my grandmother, sir, has been waiting for you. She has been waiting, sir, 4 months. She had, sir, told me on the telephone 3 weeks ago that in her 79 years, she had not until that month been told by a Lockhart she would meet a Lockhart. She is, sir, ready, Mr. Beauregard had said, daughter, Saturday morning at 9. Mr. Wright will drive. I will sit in the back with my walking stick. We will bring daughter a small, careful jar of Mama Honora's fig preserves. We will, daughter, eat your grandmother's cornbread." They had driven. Mrs. Tessely Brackett, 81 years old, had met them on the small painted wooden front porch of the Pine Street house. She had, with the small, careful, slow unhurriedness of an 81-year-old Brackett woman who had been waiting 4 months, taken Mr. Beauregard Lockhart's hand in both of hers for the length of perhaps 11 held seconds, and had said only, "Sir, the Lord, pass the cornbread." In the 10th month, Mr. Crawford Lockhart had, on the 2nd Saturday of August, invited Sebastian and Celine to the small 2-bedroom hill country stone cottage on the South Crawford pasture for a small, careful Sunday evening supper. He had grilled on the small back patio a careful brisket. Mrs. Genevieve Lockhart, his mother, had driven up from Houston. The 4 of them had, on the small, careful back patio, eaten the careful brisket together. Crawford had, at the end of the evening on the front step, taken Sebastian's right hand in his right hand and had said very quietly, "Cousin." The verbs in the end were always going to be the verbs. "I will, cousin, mind the cattle. You will, cousin, mind the rest. I am, in some other hour, going to be glad you came back." Sebastian had said, "Crawford, thank you. Mind the cattle well." Crawford had said, "I will, cousin." That small, careful exchange on the small front step at the small 2-bedroom hill country stone cottage on the South Crawford pasture had, in the years that followed, been the small, careful binding peace between the cousins. They had, in the 11th month, on a quiet Sunday afternoon under the small live oak halfway between the south porch and the bunkhouse, in the small, careful, unhurried Texas Hill country way, the patriarch had not, 26 years and 4 months earlier, agreed to be married. Mrs. Celine Brackett Lockhart and Mr. Sebastian Lockhart were married on a Saturday morning in late April at the small, careful chapel at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Fredericksburg, the small, careful chapel where Sebastian's father had married his late mother in 1963. The Reverend Father Gabriel Ottmar Klausmeier, a kind, silver-haired German-American priest of 71, had officiated. Mr. Beauregard Lockhart, by then 83, had walked Celine down the aisle in place of her own late father, who had passed of complications from diabetes in 2004. Miss Honora Cantwell had been the matron of honor. Mr. Crawford Lockhart had been Sebastian's best man, on Sebastian's small, careful insistence and Crawford's small, careful acceptance. Mrs. Tessely Brackett, 82 years old and unable to travel from the Pine Street house in Bastrop, had attended by speakerphone from the small front porch of the Pine Street house, with her own 73-year-old sister, Mrs. Magnolia Brackett Eberly, on the porch swing beside her, and had, at the moment of the kiss, said into the speakerphone in the chapel only, "Baby, the Lord, the Lord, the Lord." The Reverend Father Gabriel Ottmar Klausmeier had said, "Now, by the power vested in me by the Catholic Church of the Diocese of Austin and by the living God, I pronounce Sebastian Lockhart and Selene Brackett husband and wife. Mr. Lockhart, you may kiss your bride." Sebastian Lockhart had, very gently, kissed his bride. The small chapel choir, the careful, soft-voiced choir of St. Mary's Catholic Church, had at the kiss begun a slow, soft Texas Catholic hymn called "Be Thou My Vision" in a quiet, four-part Gillespie County German harmony. Mercy, the bay quarter-horse mare from the South Paddock fence, had been quietly tethered for the morning at the small post by the chapel side garden, with a small folded brown paper bag of 2 sugar cubes hung from her mane in a small white linen ribbon, and had, at the moment of the kiss inside the chapel, lifted her warm, soft muzzle once, very gently, against the small folded brown paper bag, as though the Lord had, on a careful Saturday morning in late April at the small, careful chapel at St. Mary's Catholic Church in Fredericksburg, allowed her also to be in the room. The small, careful Texas Hill Country Chapel had, in the small, careful private accounting Father Klausmeier kept, in a small green leather notebook in the sacristy, been the most careful wedding the chapel had hosted in the 17 years he had been its rector. Mrs. Selene Brackett Lockhart and Mr. Sebastian Lockhart were married for 31 years. They had, in the second year of the marriage, a son they named Hezekiah Beauregard Lockhart, called Zeke, after the founder and the patriarch, who grew up to be the 7th-generation owner-operator of the Bell Crow Ranch. They had, in the 4th year, a daughter they named Esperanza Tessely Lockhart, called Spera, who grew up to be a botanical taxonomist at the United States Department of Agriculture's Natural Resources Conservation Service Field Office in San Antonio. Mr. Beauregard Lockhart lived, against his own quiet expectation, to be 93. He held both grandchildren on the south porch of the patriarch's house in the years that followed. He passed peacefully on a Sunday afternoon in late autumn at 93, with Sebastian on his right side and Mrs. Honora Cantwell, by then 87 and still the housekeeper, on his left. Miss Honora Cantwell lived to be 96. She passed at 96 in her small bedroom at the patriarch's house, with Selene reading aloud from the Book of Ruth at her bedside. Mr. Crawford Lockhart eventually married at 44, a kind, soft-eyed German-American hill country veterinarian named Dr. Marigold Schimmel, with whom he had 3 boys, all of whom eventually worked for the cattle operation under their father. Sebastian Lockhart died of a stroke at the age of 76 on the south porch of the patriarch's house on a Sunday afternoon in May, with the small, folded, yellowed manila envelope of his and Esperanza's wedding photograph from the 11th of August of 1998 in his right hand. Selene, by then 59 years old and the chairman of the Bell Crow Ranch Foundation for Native Texas Hill Country Land Stewardship, had buried him beside Esperanza in the small Catholic cemetery on the outskirts of Sanderson, on Sebastian's quiet wish that he be allowed to rest beside the woman he had once, at 19, vowed to bring home to his father. Selene had, on his stone, placed only the 4 words Sebastian had spoken to Mercy on the morning of the 14th of October. The stone read, "Mama, I know, I know." Selene Brackett Lockhart had lived on the Bell Crow Ranch for the remaining 28 years of her life. She had kept on the small pine bookshelf in the small, careful 3rd-floor library of the patriarch's house the 18 blue 5 and dime spiral notebooks she had begun at 10, plus 31 further notebooks that covered the 31 years of her marriage, for 49 notebooks in all. Her daughter Spira Lockhart would, in the years that followed, edit and publish a small, thin volume of 298 of those sentences under the title The Order of the Verbs at the Bell Crow Ranch, the Night Notebooks of Selene Brackett Lockhart. The first sentence in the book was the sentence Selene had written on the night of the 14th of October of her 28th year on the small pine writing desk in her small, careful 1-bedroom employee duplex apartment. After she had, At the small live oak halfway between the south porch and the duplex, sat with the limping gardener in the small, careful Texas Hill country dusk for 1 hour and 17 minutes, and had decided that the room in her heart was, in fact, the same room. It read, "Tonight the Lord opened, on the south porch of the patriarch's house, an envelope that has been waiting 26 years and 3 months to be opened. There are people in this world who will tell you that a 6-year-old boy on a south porch in 1985, on a careless August afternoon, learning to bait a fish hook on the small irrigation pond, who has just given himself a small triangular scar on his right earlobe with a number 6 eagle claw fish hook, will not, in fact, ever wear that scar long enough for it to matter. There are people in this world who will tell you that a stiff-necked patriarchal Friday afternoon at the South Stable in the August of 1998 is a Friday afternoon a Lockhart will not ever in his lifetime get back. There are people in this world who will tell you that a small folded yellowed manila envelope in the third drawer of an upstairs bureau will, in 26 years and 3 months, simply stay in the drawer. We disagree. This story was told for you tonight by a voice that loves you, for hearts that have carried more than their share. May the Bay Quarter Horse Mare at your own South Paddock fence on a Friday morning in mid-October at 6:21 recognize in the careful low voice of the limping gardener you are about to hire, the voice she heard her own mother hear 26 years ago on a different fence, on a different ranch year. May the small triangular scar you gave yourself at 6 with a number 6 eagle claw fishhook be the scar that, in the fullness of time, brings you home. May Mama Honora, at your kitchen window, on the morning of the 14th of October, set down her dish towel without hurry and walk across her kitchen yard. May your own father in the upstairs west bedroom on the morning the Lord opens the envelope for him rise from the edge of the bed. And may every small, careful, patient, single, true sentence you have written in pencil in a small blue 5-and-dime notebook on a small pine desk in a small, careful Texas Hill country employee duplex be, in the fullness of the Lord's appointed time, read aloud 50 years from now by your own daughter in a small worn book that bears, on its cover in your own hand, the careful order of the verbs at the Bell Crow Ranch. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.